Welcome back to Notes of Curiosity.
Exploring ideas that matter.
You got it. And today, we're diving deep into a book that really gets you thinking. The Vital Question. Energy, Evolution, and the Origins of Complex Life.
Oh, this one's a fascinating read.
It really is.
It's by Nick Lane, a biochemist who spent years researching bioenergetics and evolution.
And he asks a question that sounds so simple, yet when you really think about it, it's incredibly profound. Why is life the way it is?
It's a question that has baffled scientists for centuries.
I mean, think about it. We've mapped the human genome. We can edit genes.
Yeah.
But we still don't have a clear answer to why complex life appeared only once in billions of years.
And that's where Nick Lane comes in. In The Vital Question, he challenges those traditional evolutionary theories that focus mainly on genes and natural selection.
He suggests they don't tell the whole story.
Exactly. He argues that there's a piece missing.
And that missing piece.
Energy.
Energy.
Yes. But not just energy in a general sense, but the very specific ways that cells generate and use it.
So it's about getting down to the nitty-gritty of how life powers itself.
Precisely. He starts by making us rethink what it means to be alive.
Okay, how so?
We often define life as being self-sufficient, able to replicate on its own.
Right.
But then you've got things like viruses.
Oh, good point.
They can only replicate by hijacking a host cell.
So even those organisms that seem self-sufficient, like us humans,
Even us.
we're actually not fully independent.
Exactly. We rely on this constant flow of energy and resources from our environment.
Plants too, right? Even though they can photosynthesize.
Absolutely. They still need water and nutrients from the soil.
It's like this intricate dance.
A constant exchange of energy and matter between an organism and its environment.
It all comes down to energy flow. There's this great quote from the book that really captures this.
Oh yeah, which one?
Lane says, "Life is a chemical reaction that happens to take place inside a membrane."
That's a good one. Really drives home how central energy is to, well, everything that makes us alive.
And it's not just about having energy, it's about managing it, right?
That's right. Lane challenges this idea that life is solely about information encoded in genes. He says it's about harnessing energy.
And managing entropy.
Yeah, that tendency for things to fall apart, to become disordered.
Life is constantly fighting against chaos, building order by pushing disorder out into the environment.
Exactly. He uses a really interesting example to illustrate this. The formation of those lipid membranes that surround every cell.
Those seemingly simple structures.
They appear simple, but they actually demonstrate this principle perfectly. They self-assemble, creating a more ordered structure.
So more order within the cell.
Right, but in doing so, they release heat into the surroundings.
Increasing the overall disorder, the entropy of the system as a whole.
You got it.
Okay, I'm starting to see where he's going with this. So how does this energy perspective change the way we think about the early history of life?
Well, Lane paints a fascinating picture of those early chapters. He takes us back billions of years when Earth was dominated by bacteria.
Those single-celled organisms.
Those are the ones. And they were incredibly diverse, thriving in environments that would be toxic to us.
Extracting energy from pretty much anything they could.
From sunlight to rocks. But for a long time, life remained relatively simple.
Right, and then we have the Great Oxidation Event about 2.4 billion years ago.
Ah, yes, a major turning point.
And the traditional view is that this influx of oxygen was a trigger for the evolution of more complex life.
The thinking being that oxygen provided a huge energy boost, right?
Exactly. But Lane challenges that assumption.
He does. He points out that oxygen was initially toxic to most life forms.
Wow, so instead of being helpful, it was actually a huge challenge.
Exactly. It was a hurdle that life had to overcome, and in doing so,
It drove the evolution of new metabolic pathways,
leading eventually to the development of respiration.
using oxygen to generate energy.
Precisely. It was a major evolutionary leap, but it wasn't a simple one.
And this brings us to one of the biggest mysteries in biology, the origin of eukaryotes.
Those complex cells with a nucleus and all the other organelles.
It's like there's this huge gap between those simple bacteria and the cells that make up our own bodies.
And that's a gap that traditional evolutionary theories struggled to explain.
Lane argues that relying solely on genetics to explain this transition just doesn't cut it.
It falls short.
We don't see those gradual missing links in the fossil record that we'd expect to see.
And he also debunks another common idea, that certain simple eukaryotes are actually evolutionary intermediates.
Like they're stuck in an earlier stage of evolution.
Exactly. But genomic evidence actually shows that these organisms are simplified descendants of more complex ancestors,
So they've lost complexity over time.
rather than representing a primitive stage.
Okay, so if it wasn't a gradual process, what did drive this leap to complexity? Where did these sophisticated eukaryotic cells come from?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. And Lane proposes a radical answer. He argues that the acquisition of mitochondria,
The powerhouses of the cell.
those are the ones. He says acquiring those was a singular defining event, a merger, an endosymbiosis that changed the course of life forever.
So mitochondria weren't just some add-on, they were crucial.
They were the key to unlocking complexity. And to understand why this merger was so important, we need to understand the limitations of energy production in those early bacteria. And that's where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive.
Well, I am definitely hooked. The way Lane connects energy, evolution, and the very essence of life is just fascinating. I can't wait to hear more in part 2.
It really makes you wonder,
Why not?
why this merger, this event that led to complex life, happened only once.
Yeah, it's such a fundamental shift.
If it was so beneficial, why didn't other lineages stumble upon the same solution?
Right, like what were the odds? It's almost like winning the evolutionary lottery.
Well, Lane argues it wasn't just about luck.
Yeah.
He says there were these specific energetic constraints
Interesting.
that made this merger not only beneficial, but incredibly improbable.
So it wasn't just chance, there were other factors at play.
Exactly. And it all boils down to proton gradients.
Proton gradients. Okay, remind me what those are again. It's been a while since biology class.
Sure, think of them like tiny biological batteries.
Battery batteries.
Yeah. All cells, from bacteria to our own, use the flow of protons across a membrane to power themselves.
Protons being those positively charged hydrogen atoms, right?
That's right. And this flow creates a gradient, a difference in electrical potential.
A difference in charge.
Yeah, and the cell can tap into that difference to drive all sorts of processes.
So it's kind of like a water wheel,
Oh, that's a good analogy.
where the flow of water creates the power to turn the wheel.
Exactly. But here's the thing. The amount of energy a cell can produce is limited by the surface area of these membranes where the proton gradients form.
Okay.
And this limitation is especially problematic for bacteria
Is that?
because their energy-generating membranes are wrapped around the outside of the cell.
I see. So the bigger the bacteria gets, the more energy it needs.
Yeah. But its ability to generate that energy doesn't keep up.
So it's like trying to power a city with a single power outlet.
That's a great way to put it. And Lane argues that this energetic constraint is a big reason why bacteria have remained relatively simple for billions of years.
They hit an energy ceiling that prevents them from evolving more complex structures.
Precisely. But eukaryotes, with their mitochondria, somehow managed to break through that ceiling.
So how did they do it?
That's where the ancient merger comes in. Remember, by engulfing a bacterium that eventually became the mitochondria,
Yeah?
the archaeal host gained an internal source of energy.
Right.
And importantly, these mitochondria have their own membranes, increasing the total surface area available for generating those proton gradients.
It's like suddenly having thousands of tiny power plants distributed throughout the cell.
Instead of that single overstretched outlet.
Exactly. It's a much more efficient system.
Exactly. This internal energy source freed eukaryotes from those energetic shackles that bound bacteria,
They could now generate far more power.
leading to larger cells.
More sophisticated internal compartments.
And all those energy-hungry innovations that characterize eukaryotic life.
So mitochondria weren't just a helpful addition. They were absolutely game-changing.
They revolutionized the way cells produce and manage energy.
And Lane doesn't stop there. He argues that this energetic shift also helps explain why eukaryotes evolved things like sexual reproduction
Oh yeah,
and programmed cell death.
processes that seem counterintuitive from a purely genetic perspective.
Right, because they seem to go against the idea of survival of the fittest.
But when you consider the energy costs and benefits, they start to make sense.
Okay, I'm really curious about this. What do sex and death have to do with energy?
Well, think about sexual reproduction with all its complexity.
Meiosis, genetic recombination, finding a mate.
It's energetically expensive, but Lane suggests that it's a way to deal with damage to mitochondrial DNA,
Because mitochondria have their own genomes.
separate from the cell's nucleus.
And those mitochondrial genes are essential for energy production.
Absolutely. So by shuffling genes through sexual reproduction,
Eukaryotes can weed out those harmful mutations in their mitochondrial DNA.
ensuring the quality and efficiency of those energy generators.
It's like a quality control system for the power plants of the cell,
Exactly. And then there's programmed cell death, or apoptosis,
which allows for the removal of cells with damaged mitochondria.
preventing them from harming the whole organism.
But why would a cell choose to die? It seems counterintuitive.
From an energy perspective, it makes sense to sacrifice a few damaged cells.
To protect the energy integrity of the whole system,
Exactly. It's like pruning a tree.
getting rid of diseased branches to ensure the health of the whole tree.
That's a great analogy. It's all about maintaining that robust and efficient energy flow throughout the body.
This is incredible. So even these fundamental processes like sex and death are shaped by the way cells manage their energy.
It's all connected. And this lens of bioenergetics,
This focus on energy.
it reveals connections that we might have missed otherwise.
It helps us understand why bacteria, despite their amazing metabolic abilities, remain simple.
And why eukaryotes, with their unique energy setup, took a different path,
It's like Lane is adding this whole new dimension to the story of life.
bringing energy to the forefront.
And it makes me question everything I thought I knew about evolution.
It's a powerful perspective. And in the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore some of Lane's even bolder propositions.
Oh, like what?
He delves into the implications of this energy perspective for things like aging, disease, consciousness, and even the possibility of life beyond Earth.
Wow, I can't wait to hear more. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Nick Lane's The Vital Question.
Picking up where we left off.
I'm still amazed by this idea, that something as basic as energy could have shaped the entire course of life on Earth.
It's a profound concept.
And Lane doesn't hold back.
No, he doesn't.
In these later chapters, he tackles some really big questions.
Yeah, like
The evolution of intelligence, the nature of consciousness.
even the possibility of life beyond Earth.
It's mind-blowing. And one thing that really stood out to me was his take on natural selection.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
It's not that he dismisses it, but he argues that it's only part of the story.
Right, he's not saying natural selection is wrong.
It explains how organisms adapt to their environment, but it doesn't fully explain why life took the specific path it did.
Exactly, like, why did complex life arise only once?
Why didn't other lineages make that leap?
Good questions. And Lane suggests that those energetic constraints we talked about played a big role in shaping the playing field of evolution.
So it's not just random chance, there are these fundamental limits.
These limits that channel evolution in certain directions,
It's like evolution is playing a hand of cards, but the deck is stacked in a certain way.
stacked by the laws of physics and the availability of energy.
Exactly. And this leads to some pretty interesting predictions.
Like what?
Well, he connects the evolution of intelligence, of complex brains like ours, to the energy demands of those brains.
Ah, yeah, our brains are real energy hogs.
He points out that the human brain, even though it's only 2% of our body mass,
Consumes a whopping 20% of our energy.
it's incredible. And he argues that this high energy demand creates a selective pressure for increased intelligence.
Makes sense. We need those big brains to solve problems, to find food and shelter.
To find mates.
But that high energy consumption also makes us vulnerable, right?
Admittedly, it's like a double-edged sword,
Big brains are great for problem solving.
but they come at a cost.
We become dependent on a constant and reliable source of energy.
And this shapes our behavior and our social structures.
It's a classic evolutionary trade-off.
It really highlights how deeply intertwined energy is with every aspect of our existence.
And Lane takes this even further.
Further,
He starts speculating about the implications for life on other planets.
ooh, this is where it gets really interesting.
He suggests that the availability of energy is likely a universal constraint on the evolution of complexity.
So if we're searching for intelligent life out there in the universe,
We should be looking for planets with abundant energy sources.
but not just any energy, right?
It has to be the right kind of energy
Energy that can be harnessed efficiently.
to allow for those complex information processing systems that we associate with intelligent life.
It makes you wonder, are there other planets out there with their own versions of mitochondria?
Powering alien brains.
It's a fascinating thought.
Yeah,
And while we can't answer that question yet,
not yet at least.
Lane's book really pushes us to ask it.
And I think that's a sign of truly great science writing.
To not only explain what we know, but also inspire us to explore the unknown.
Absolutely. The Vital Question has been a thought-provoking read.
It really has.
It's challenged my assumptions, expanded my understanding of life.
And left me with this sense of awe at the interconnectedness of energy, evolution, and complexity.
It's a book that stays with you.
It definitely does, and I highly recommend it to anyone who's curious about the deep mysteries of life.
And the forces that have shaped our world.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive,
What's your biggest takeaway?
hmm, for me, it's how much we still don't know.
Yeah, there's so much left to discover.
But Lane reminds us that the pursuit of knowledge.
It's an ongoing adventure.
So I encourage you to pick up a copy of The Vital Question and embark on your own journey of discovery. And as you read, consider this.
Okay, I'm listening.
If energy really is the driving force of evolution, what does that mean for our future as a species? Can we keep pushing those boundaries of complexity without exceeding our energetic limits?
It's something to think about as we navigate the challenges and possibilities of the 21st century.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep those notes of curiosity flowing.